that her life had been anything but an easy one. The constant anxiety about money and her father's affairs had worn her down and hardened her, till, as she said, she began to feel as though she had no heart left. Then, too, he heard all her trouble about her dead and only brother James. How dearly she had loved him, and what a sore trouble he had been with his extravagant ways and his continual demands for money, which had to be met somehow or other. At last came the crushing blow of his death, and with it the certainty of the extinction of the male line of the de la Molles, and she said that for a while she had believed her father would never hold up his head again. But his vitality was equal to the shock, and after a while the debts began to come in, which, although he was not legally bound to do so, her father would insist upon meeting to the last farthing, for the honour of the family and out of respect for his son's memory. And there was more trouble about money that had gone on, always getting worse as the agricultural depression deepened, till things had reached their present position. All this she told him bit by bit, keeping back from him only the last development of the drama and the part that Edward Cossey had played in it. And sad enough it made him to think of that ancient house of de la Molle vanishing into the night of ruin. Also she told him something of her own life, how companionless it had been since her brother went into the army, for she had no real friends about Honham, and not even an acquaintance of her own tastes, which, without being gushingly so, were decidedly artistic and intellectual. "I should have wished," she said, "to try to do something in the world. I dare say I should have failed, for I know that very few women meet with success which is worth having. But still I should have liked to try, for I am not afraid of work, but the current of my life is against it. The only thing that is open to me is to strive and make both ends meet upon an income which is already growing smaller, and to save my father, poor dear, from as much worry as I can. Don't think that I am complaining," she went on hurriedly, "or that I want to rush into pleasure seeking, because I do not. A little of that goes a long way with me. Besides, I know that I have many things to be thankful for. Few women have such a kind father as mine, though we do quarrel at times. Of course we cannot have everything our own way in this world, and I dare say that I do not make the best of things. Still, at times it does seem a little hard that I should be forced to lead such a narrow life, just when I feel that I could work in a wide one." Harold looked up at her face and saw that a tear was gathering in her dark eyes, and in his heart he registered a vow that if by any means it ever lay within his power to improve her lot, he would give everything he had to do it. But all he said was, "Don't be downhearted, Miss de la Molle. Things change in a wonderful way, and often they mend when they look worst. You know," he went on a little nervously, "I am an old-fashioned sort of individual, and I believe in Providence and all that sort of thing, you see, and that matters generally come pretty well straight in the long run if people deserve it." Ida shook her head a little doubtfully and sighed. "Perhaps," she said, "but I suppose that we do not deserve it. Anyhow, our good fortune is a long while coming," and the conversation dropped. Still, her friend's strong belief in the efficacy of Providence, and generally his masculine sturdiness, did cheer her up considerably. Even the strongest women, if they have any element that can be called feminine left in them, want somebody of the other sex to lean on, and she was no exception to the rule. Besides, if Ida's society had charms for Colonel Quaritch, his society had almost if not quite as much charm for her. It may be remembered that on the night when they first met she had spoken to herself of him as the kind of man whom she would like to marry. The thought was a passing one, and it may be safely said that she had not since entertained any serious idea of marriage in connection with Colonel Quaritch. The only person there seemed to be the slightest probability of her marrying was Edward Cossey, and the mere thought of this was enough to make the whole idea of matrimony repugnant to her. But notwithstanding, day by day she found Harold Quaritch's society more congenial. Herself by nature, and also to a certain degree by education, a cultured woman, she rejoiced to find in him an entirely kindred spirit. For beneath his somewhat rugged and unpromising exterior, Harold Quaritch hid a vein of considerable richness. Few of those who associated with him would have believed that the man had a side to his nature which was almost poetic, or that he was a ripe and finished scholar, and what is more, not devoid of a certain dry humour. Then he had travelled far and seen much of men and manners, gathering up all sorts of quaint odds and ends of information. But perhaps rather than these accomplishments, it was the man's transparent honesty and simple-mindedness, his love for what is true and noble, and his contempt of what is mean and base, which, unwittingly peeping out through his conversation, attracted her more than all the rest. Ida was no more a young girl to be caught by a handsome face or dazzled by a superficial show of mind. She was a thoughtful, ripened woman, quick to perceive, and with the rare talent of judgment wherewith to weigh the proceeds of her perception. In plain middle-aged Colonel Quaritch she found a very perfect gentleman, and valued him accordingly. And so day grew into day through that lovely autumn tide. Edward Cossey was away in London. Quest had ceased from troubling, and journeying together through the sweet shadows of companionship, by slow but sure degrees they drew near to the sunlit plain of love. For it is not common, indeed it is so uncommon as to be almost impossible, that a man and woman between whom there stands no natural impediment can halt for very long in those shadowed ways. There is throughout all nature an impulse that pushes ever onwards towards completion, and from completion to fruition. Liking leads to sympathy, sympathy points the path to love, and love demands its own. This is the order of affairs, and down its well-trodden road these two were quickly travelling. George saw the wily of it, and winked his eye with solemn meaning. The Squire also saw something of it, not being wanting in the knowledge of the world, and after much cogitation and many solitary walks, elected to leave matters alone for the present. He liked Colonel Quaritch, and thought that it would be a good thing for Ida to get married, though the idea of parting from her troubled his heart sorely. Whether or no it would be desirable from his point of view that she should marry the Colonel was a matter on which he had not as yet fully made up his mind. Sometimes he thought it would, and sometimes he thought the reverse. Then at times vague ideas suggested by Edward Cossey's behaviour about the loan would come to puzzle him. But at present he was so much in the dark that he could come to no absolute decision. So with unaccustomed wisdom for so headstrong and precipitate a man, he determined to refrain from interference, and for a while at any rate allow events to take their natural course. End of chapter 15.